We're here with John Zant, and you were saying?
Well, the community's evolved over the years, and there may be a little diminished following of high school sports and community sports, just because there's more of a elite factor in people who live here, and sometimes the middle class families move out before their kids reach high school age, and it's a different picture. And like I say, I'm old school. I turned 60 this year, and I'm not dealing with. I still believe in newspapers on paper. Not in websites, and I probably would not be a good candidate to work in media for the next couple decades because of my roots, but I think I can still hang in for a few more years on a newspaper, before I say sayonara.
How's technology changed since you've been a writer?
Well, I had a typewriter in my first at least 10 years on the job, if not more, an old Underwood. And I typed my stories out on copy paper and made corrections with pencil. And
you mean using carbon paper for copies?
Yeah, we made 2 copies. One went to the radio station, which was owned by the news press at the time, KTMS, which stood for TM Stork. And there's a station still with those call letters in town. And so sometimes the radio guy would scoop us. He'd read the stories that were going to appear in the paper, and that was sort of a weird thing, but it was just the way things seemed to work. But
in terms of technology.
Yeah, and then we had one copy for our own reference, and then the original copy went to a typesetter, who you hoped would get, do a faithful transcription of your story, because he would put it in linotype.
Would he grab them off the shelf, the letters?
We had some, it was some complex machine. It had a keyboard, and it had some kind of hot lead,
it was pouring hot
tank
lead?
in it, and it made type out of this lead. And I don't know, it was a mystery to me. It was almost, we call it the daily miracle, that a paper would come out with all this weird processes. And there were vats of hot lead around, and it was clanky and noisy, and the newsroom was noisy because everybody was hammering away at typewriters, and there were teletype machines for AP and UPI and New York Times News Service, and people were ripping copy up, and we had glue pots. If I had a 4-page story, I'd glue the pages together.
You mean to lay them out?
No, to have them in the right order when they did the typesetting. That way they'd have a continuous roll of paper, and they wouldn't lose page 2 or something, and totally mess up your story. At least it would be in the right order, even if they goofed up some of the words. But then there were proofreaders that made corrections, and they would correct each line of type that had a mistake in it had to be corrected, and it was a very involved process. Then they'd put the pages together. It was I don't know what you call them now, just
layout
frames. They were sort of wooden frames, and they put the type in them, and the pictures were on blocks of wood, and they stuck engravings on top of that. And it was called hot type, and then they made an impression of that plate would be transmitted to a flexible thing that could be put into a semicircle that would go on the printing press. And then we were an afternoon paper at the time, and so the press was right adjacent to us, and the building would rumble, and twice a day. We had a morning edition at 10 and an afternoon edition at 2, and you knew your stories were rolling off into into the paper.
What years would that have been about?
68 when I started, through
What were some
late
of the big,
70s.
What were some of the big local stories in your time? I guess not necessarily sports, but do they come to mind?
No, the oil spill in '69. I mean, it wasn't a sports story, but that was huge.
Yeah.
Some people think the environmental movement started here with that. And we had a great environmental reporter named Bob Solon, on that story. We've had fires, the Sycamore fire that burned out, several hundred homes in Sycamore Canyon, and then the Painted fire that in 1990, I believe. And that's when newspapers really felt important, when, we had to be there, and we were,
Were you there?
That's how you did the big ones that made a, newspaper.
Were you for the Bank of America burning?
Actually, that happened when I was in my first years.
What
yeah,
did?
1970, the Bank of America burning out in Isla Vista. Yeah, and those were wild times. National Guard in Isla Vista.
What was that about, if people don't know?
Well, it was during all the late 60s, anti-Vietnam War protests and anti-establishment, the Chicago 7, but Santa Barbara was sort of behind the curve. It was very placid through the early part of that turmoil, but then when it did catch fire, it was, there was quite an explosion of pent-up anger that led to a crowd, lit some fires around this dinky little Bank of America branch in Isla Vista, and it burned down. And somebody planted a bomb in the UCSB Faculty Club, and some poor caretaker was killed. That was about that era too. Some of the nasty things of that era came out.
I appreciate your thoughts, John. Don't want to keep you too long.
Yeah, I got to ride my bike home before dark.
Okay. One last question, if you can. Any thoughts how we got to this place with this whole News Press mess?
I don't know. You'd have to be inside Wendy McCaw's brain probably to find out why and why it came down to this. Because in the absence of all this, every newspaper in the country needs creativity and energy to find ways to stay engaged with readers and keep them wanting newspapers, because the industry as a whole is suffering. And to have all this going on is just insane. That's all I can say.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice to see you.
What's your name again?
I'm Larry Nimmer, and this will be on the Community Access channel, the Santa Barbara channel.